The poem I decided to do is The Chance to Love Everything by Mary Oliver. All summer I made friends with the creatures nearby. They flowed through the fields and under the tent walls, or padded through the door, grinning through their many teeth. I looking for seeds, soot, sugar, and muttering and humming, opening the bread box happiest when there was milk and music. But once in the night I heard a sound. Outside the door, the canvas bulged slightly, something was pressing inward at eye level. I watched, trembling, sure I had heard the click of claws, the smack of lips. Outside my gauze house, I imagined the red eyes, the broad tongue, the enormous lap. Would it be friendly too? Fear defeated me, and yet, not in faith and not in madness, but with the courage I thought my dream deserved. I stepped outside. It was gone. Then I whirled at the sound of some shambling tonnage. Did I see a black hunch slipping back through the trees? Did I see the moonlight shining on it? Did I actually reach out my arms toward it, toward paradise falling, like the fading of the darkest hope, wildest hope? The dark heart of the story, that is all, the reason for its telling. So after reading this, I really enjoyed the fact that it is so real and that it is Mary Oliver's own personal experience. It talks a lot about, her fears and her out in the wilderness, most likely on a camping trip, and she overcomes this fear at nighttime when she hears these sounds. And I also really like these type of poems that are very realistic and people can relate to. Most people do have a fear, and they eventually will overcome this fear, whether it's, they need major help, or it's just something so simple of just, standing up and like what Mary did here. You just gotta branch out and hope for the best, and, and just let it not get to your head. And I also really enjoy the way she writes. She is she has a lot of imagery, and her tone makes it very enjoyable piece, and even though it is a topic of fear and overcoming it. This poem is actually a very simple and an easy one to understand. It's almost straight to the point, I feel, but it does still have these complex elements to it within this imagery that she is using. Like I said, this poem is about her own personal experience, so that makes this a narrative type of poem. It seems that she is talking about her own personal camping experiences, maybe when she was younger, and the fears that she had going through her trip. Specifically at nighttime. During the day, it talks about, her experience of enjoying all the nature around her and all the creatures. And like I said, we can assume this because of the way she's describing everything. It seems like it's coming from her own story in her own words of how she saw things, not something that's made up. And the theme for this is about courage and overcoming fears. Like I said, it's about her facing this fear of what is out there at night and her not letting it get to her and having that courage to continue on her trip. And then I also found that the tone, it starts out happy and almost childlike, like when she experienced this, because it starts out by saying, all summer I made friends with creatures nearby. That's line 1. And it's her talking about her enjoying what's around her and the creatures and nature, and it's a happy kind of tone. But then at night we see this shift from her going from this happy childlike to almost an intense type of fear, and she's very cautious of what's around her, not wanting to move, and all that. And she shows this emotion, like conflict between her emotions very well, her fear and her uneasy over the strange noises and the shadows outside of her tent. And then she has that indecision point in that moment when she has to decide whether she wants to go find out what's out there or, just live there in fear. But she got the courage. Like I said, that's the big theme of this. She got the courage to go outside and, branch out and make sure that everything is okay and not let it get to her and ruin her trip. She does use imagery. Been talking about that this whole time. She uses distinct characteristics to describe this monster, I guess, or what's in her head. For example, quote from line 15 and 16, "I watched trembling, sure I had heard the click of claws, the smack of lips." In this quote, we can see this young girl sitting there trembling in her bed, in her sleeping bag, whatever she's in her tent. And she's trembling because of this presence of this non-human presence, or a monster, as I would call it. So she feels that it is very near, and that's why we start to, see her trembling and scared. And then also, the claws, and during this line, it's using personification because it's giving these characteristics to a non-existent thing, which causes fear and confusion for her. And then some sound devices, and the language that is used during this is very short and descriptive, but it really does aid to this poem, because, for example, it talks about my gauzy house. They flowed through the fields, padded through the door, something was pressing inwards. Lines 3, 5, and 14. And then it describing sound, muttering and humming, line 8. She's describing her emotions in many points of this, fear defeated me, the trembling, any of that, she's describing how she's feeling. And then a visual we saw with the monster, the red eyes, the broad tongue, smacking the lips, things like that. It's describing something very tangible and that we can picture ourselves and create this image. And even like a positive. In the beginning, it's talking about, her in this countryside and these beautiful creatures, and all I picture is little animals running around, happy, almost like in Pocahontas, like in that kind of movie. She's describing something very joyful. And because of these very descriptive and devices that she uses to describe different things, that is how we do see her shift, like I stated before. And she makes it very complex and subtle, but it does have a big impact on what the whole situation is. So at this point, I would do an activity which would kind of help us feel like we were in her shoes. Now, we're not going on some type of camping trip, but I would do is put a bunch of little pieces of paper with different types of fear in them. So an example would be failing a class, losing a friendship, having a fear of not being successful in the future, a fear of losing $1, I don't know, something so simple. I put into a hat and hand these out and pass them around to the class, and everyone would get an individual fear, and all these fears are going to be tailored to students here and really anyone in general, because everyone has a fear, and no matter how big or small, it can be solved, and through this we'll do that. So once everyone does have a little slip of paper with a fear on it, we would go around and everyone would say what fear they had selected, and they would give either one piece of advice, or they would describe how they would overcome this fear and help, get over it, in a sense, or steps that you can take to try and get over it. And through this, we would see that even the simplest little things, like, for example, if you got failing in class as your fear, you could just say, go get help from a teacher. Losing a friendship, just stay in contact. All these little simple things are what really helps us overcome these things. And in Mary Oliver's case, she's talking about this fear of the unknown and what's out there, what could be out there. And she doesn't let it get to her, and she just becomes, more optimistic about the situation and not saying what if, she's, trying to make it positive, and it could be something out there that, she loves, like these little creatures that come and visit her every day. So she's just, trying to not let it get to her, and she steps outside of her tent and, verifies that she is okay, and like I said, not get to her. So this whole activity would show that these little things are really big things and can help anyone in any kind of situation. And it won't, stop them from, if it's stopping you from getting your dream, there is a solution, and there is always going to be a path that you can take. So with all that being said, I hope you guys really enjoyed this poem. Like I said, it's a very realistic scenario, because everyone does have a fear. I have a fear, you have a fear. And by reading these poems, it could help, get through these fears that people may have, or just these type of poems in general. They're good personal stories that are told in a very creative way that people can understand and can relate to. So I hope you enjoyed, and